Hey everybody, I just wanted to discuss how scripture shows us that Israel will be divinely protected during the last 3.5 years of the tribulation. Let's begin in Revelation chapter 12, verses 13 through 17. It says, "Now, when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place where she is nourished for a time, times, and a half a time from the presence of the serpent. So the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened his mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring, who keep the commandments of God and who have the testimony of Jesus Christ." So the dragon, when he sees that he has been defeated, permanently cast out of heaven. Again, this is the second half, the Great Tribulation, the second half of the 7-year tribulation, the last 3.5 years. So when he sees that he's been permanently thrown out of heaven down to earth, he turns his wrath on the woman who represents Israel here. The persecution of the nation of Israel is now before us at this point. It's the time of Jacob's trouble. And so Satan hates Israel, first because they're God's elect people, and next because the nation of Israel brought forth Christ, who is to have the kingdom when Satan is finally overthrown. And finally, he hates them because Israel is the perpetual proof of the truth of scriptures and the fact of Jehovah God, Yahweh. The Greek verb translated persecuted here in our passage in verse 13 means to pursue or to hunt. So it is used in the New Testament of pursuit with a hostile intent here. So Satan is here being described as pursuing and hunting down the Jews as they try to flee into the wilderness. So now understanding that, we need to understand that this is the real Israel and not merely those who are of Israel. This is the remnant of the last days that it's being spoken of here. So in these verses, we also read of God's protection and preservation of his covenant people. John writes that the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she could fly into the wilderness to her place, it says. And so understand these are not actual wings of a great eagle, but God is speaking of his divine protection in getting the remnant out of Israel and into a place of safety that God has prepared for them in the wilderness, a place where Satan cannot reach them. And so the imagery of the wings of an eagle actually comes from the book of Exodus, when the children were fleeing Egypt. In Exodus chapter 19, verse 4, God speaking, he says, You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. So the imagery of wings in scripture can symbolize strength and speed, but most often it speaks of protection. And so when they come to a place here that it's spoken of in chapter 12 of Revelation, a place that's prepared for them by God, as we saw in verse 6, there it says they're going to be nourished for 1,260 days, or as verse 14 told us, for a time, times, and a half a time. And so this place, I believe, is Basra or Petra in Jordan, known as Moab in the Bible. And this is prophesied actually in Isaiah chapter 16, verse 4. It says, Let my outcasts dwell in you, O Moab. Be a shelter to them from the face of the spoiler. For the executioner is at an end. Devastation ceases, and the oppressors are consumed out of the land. So God will supernaturally provide food and water for the remnant that is hidden away in the wilderness here. Understand, for 40 years, God supplied manna and water in the wilderness in the Exodus for the children of Israel. And so here he's going to do the same and provide for the people's needs. So John borrows Daniel's phraseology here when he writes that the remnant would be nourished for a time, times, and a half a time. This is how Daniel described 3.5 years of the tribulation, the last part. And so that, of course, like I said, is called the Great Tribulation, or the time of Jacob's trouble. Understand that a time is 1 year, times is 2 years, and a half a time is a half a year. So you got 1 year, times is 2 years, and then, a half a year. So it's talking about 3.5 years. Then next in this passage, we're told that the serpent poured water out like a river out of his mouth after the woman, and she fled, hoping that she would not be swept away or swallowed up by this thing. Sorry, I have to plug in my phone, my camera here. And so whatever the dragon has spewed out of his mouth, she's trying to flee from this. And so the dragon, seeing that he cannot reach the woman to destroy her now, because it says the earth opened up and swallowed whatever it was that he sent to the women, whether or not that was an army or something supernatural. Once God intervenes and swallows that, defeats it, protects her from that, seeing that he cannot reach the woman and destroy her, he then turns his rage from her and goes to make war with the rest of her children. And so the rest of her children here are described as those who keep the commandments of God and hold the testimony of Jesus. So the rest of her children here are both Jewish and Gentile believers who did not flee to the wilderness, possibly because they don't live in Israel, but maybe are in other parts of the world. It refers to all those during the tribulation who have repented of their sin and believed that Jesus died for them and was buried and rose again on the third day. And these are now waiting for Jesus' second coming to rescue them. And so we're told here that is who Satan has now turned. Anybody who's not fled to the wilderness are now being persecuted by the Antichrist. They're also described, these people, as holding the testimony of Jesus's truths. And so those are the things being taught and held by them of the New Testament. And so these persecuted believers here will be giving further evidence that their faith is real by their obedience to the scriptures, even when they're faced with death from the Antichrist. And so that's who's being pursued at this point. And at first it seems that the dragon is winning, as many of these saints will enter into eternity as martyrs for their faith in Jesus. But in the end, even this attack on God's people will fail. All of Satan's efforts to stop the millennial kingdom of Jesus from being established will fail. The Lord will triumph over his usurper, and he will reign as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Also note here, understand that there is a very clear difference in Scripture between Israel, who will be divinely protected yet go through the tribulation, and the church, who will be removed prior to that time. I did a scripturally backed video that is titled Israel versus the Church that I will pin a link to in the comments below this video for those who would like to hear scriptural proof of the difference here. You can actually tell there are references in Scripture that is speaking directly of Israel, and the actual original language of it tells us that Israel's going through, whereas the actual original language, the Greek speaking about the church, actually says they will be kept out of and not go through. So it is very clear for those who actually dive in and study it. And so I'll pin a link to that video below. But hopefully that gives a little bit of clarity what Satan's freedoms are right now on earth. He has not currently been cast out to earth or down to earth permanently. I do not believe that happens until the last half of the tribulation. And so that is when he realizes that all his tactics have failed, and that he's even lost the ability to go back and forth. And I think that's when true reality actually hits him. I think ignorantly he thinks until that point that he actually has a chance. He's still going to lash out in anger even in the last half, but I do not believe that he is permanently thrown out until that midpoint.